welcome to Health Issues. I'm your host, Chris Sylvain, and I am so excited about today. It's actually a reunion, so to speak, but we have a great guest for you, an awesome academic. Her name is Dr. Kim Vaz-Deville, all right? She's Associate Dean of College of Arts and Sciences, Professor of Education. Welcome, Dr. Vaz.
Thank you so much, Chris. It's so nice to be reunited again.
Reunited. And so people that know, get some background. We kind of grew up together.
Yes.
Hadn't seen each other in, I don't know how many years. We won't even count them. We would have to date each other to count these years, to 30 or whatever. But and just to connect and find out what she's doing. But first of all, let's even start. She's an educator and administrator, but she wrote a book called The Baby Dolls. And before we talk about, her work at Xavier University in Louisiana, I want to talk about, let's talk about the baby dolls and the thrust of it and just walk us through.
All right. Well, Chris, that we in New Orleans are blessed to have several African-American distinct Mardi Gras traditions. One of the traditions is the Zulu Social Aid and Pleasure Club. They've been around well over 100 years. They are a benevolent society as well as a parading group. So they help each other in times of sickness and in health. They pay back to the community in terms of social responsibility, and they have a major parade on Mardi Gras, which has been celebrated for years. We also have the Black Indians, or as they more currently have been called, the Mardi Gras Indians, groups of friends and neighbors who form themselves and organize themselves in suited positions, as they call them, from a big chief to a trail chief to a flag boy. And they may have queens, and they spend an entire year constructing and crafting their own suits. They are the artists of our community, both in terms of the visual material culture that they produce in terms of their beautiful, unique suits, and the song and musical traditions that they foster, practice year-round, and carry out. We also have another tradition called the Skeletons, or the Skull and Bone Gangs, and they also have their own craft traditions associated with them. In the past, they've made large heads out of paper mache. They used to emerge on Mardi Gras Day from the cemeteries and knock on people's doors and let them know, hey, you better come out, you better have fun today, you better celebrate today, because life is short and you might be next.
Wow. Not
here. And there's another lesser-known tradition, and that is the tradition of the baby dolls. It is mired in controversy about the origins of the baby dolls. Now, some people attribute it to women who were working in the Vice District around the time of the Storyville era, where one day a group of women got together and decided that they wanted to costume and rival another group of women, and they were already transgressing boundaries of social norms for women at that time, and they came out in little gingham outfits or satin outfits, and they had their garters, and they were smoking their cigars, and they were having a good time and challenging each other. And but there's another story of origin, that at that time the popular culture, they were talking about little women as dolls, and they had Pretty Baby, which was a song composed by Tony Jackson, a New Orleans African-American pianist and great musician. His song Pretty Baby went on to Tin Pan Alley fame and is still one of the more popular songs in popular culture. And he talked about Pretty Baby. There were other songs about when, grown-up ladies dressed up like babies, just makes men's hearts go wild. And so people say that, well, there was so much about masking, about women being baby dolls, that, just regular, ordinary women who were housewives and wanting to have a good time, they started dressing up as baby dolls. So we don't know the exact origins, but what we know is that people who masked as baby dolls, and there were men too who masked as baby dolls, putting on those little satin outfits or, whatever they could get their hands on and coming out, they were bawdy. Because Mardi Gras is all about turning everyday culture on its head and doing the things that you can't talk about, or you don't talk about in polite society. And so baby dolls as a Mardi Gras tradition came out of those origins, but they also came out of the origins of segregation. Black women and black men began masking as baby dolls, and as did the Mardi Gras Indians and the Zulu Social Aid and Pleasure Club members, because they were locked out of Mardi Gras. They were not invited to white and elite parties and societies and crews, and so the baby dolls come out of black women and men making a place primarily for black women, or the expression of black femininity in a time that they were excluded from being seen. And that's the origin of the baby dolls. By 1930, they became iconic. People began to expect the baby dolls, their ratty walking, their bawdy nature, and it declined as all things did. But there was a resurgence right before Hurricane Katrina, and it's been something that's been infecting and exciting the imagination of people today, to where numerous women are taking up the mantle of the baby doll tradition, redefining it, and performing it, and having a real good time.
Oh, that is so amazing, because, all right, let's connect a few dots, okay? All right, because you and I grew up Virgil Boulevard, Pilot Land. I found out later it was Pilot Land. We were always known as Pilot Land. But anyway, down in that area. So you're primarily a researcher,
yes.
All right? But growing up in Pilot Land, you were able to experience firsthand and literally be a part of the entire Mardi Gras tradition, the second line tradition, and literally carrying it all the way through from a lot of different viewpoints.
You know, you and I were talking about the way we grew up on Virgil Boulevard, the very special place it was, all the families, all the ways that, you know, we were just a big family of children. And,
right.
and my most direct experience of Mardi Gras was marching in the parades. My father and all the other fathers who were who had girls in the band at St. Mary's Academy, they would accompany us, and we'd walk in those Mardi Gras parades. And so I know what it's like to walk those Mardi Gras parade routes. My grandparents, my great-grandparents and grandparents lived on Claiborne Avenue, right across the street from where many of the Indians would come out. Now, the baby dolls I didn't know about until I started doing research later on New Orleans black traditions, because I wanted to know something about how black people articulated agency outside of institutional structures when they had been so discriminated from them. And so while we had the court system that we tried to make a change through, and we had education and we tried, there were other people who still felt left out of all of that and used the culture to make a voice for themselves, to create visibility for themselves, to be seen, not just as, you're working as a domestic someplace else, but you came out in your community, and as an expression of your importance in the community, as an expression of your authentic voice, you created a costume, you participated in a song and dance tradition that harkens back to elements of Africa, and you were celebrated in your community, and your identity was more than that little constrained identity that you had at work, where people didn't necessarily want to see your full value. And that is the value of these traditions.
Okay, a couple of questions. First of all, the connection between the baby dolls and second line. The second line tradition, even though it included women, for the most part, historically we see it as a man's thing. Women always participated still till this day. We saw it as a man's thing.
Yes.
And a reflection, like you say, carrying all the way back to Africa. But the baby dolls, as you say, is purely, even though men may have participated, is purely an expression of femininity.
And feminism, even though they wouldn't have called it that.
Black Lives Matter.
Black Lives Matter. And black women's lives mattered to them. The women who started this were poor. They started at a time when there was disenfranchisement. The women couldn't vote. Even if they had an education, they didn't have opportunities to use that education. So they were completely disenfranchised. So they took the things that were right at their fingertips, their clothes, the music traditions, the opportunity of Mardi Gras to make an art performance right in front of their neighbors where they were celebrated. And so they wouldn't have called themselves feminists, but they wouldn't even have called themselves political. They called themselves having a good time. But anytime you push the boundary and you engage in a norm that is not the norm for your particular group of women, then you're doing something political. If a woman takes a cigar back in 19-teens and smokes it in the public, that is a violation of femininity. But they felt so empowered in that other people's definitions, middle-class people's definitions, white people's definitions, the church's definitions even in some ways, were not going to limit how they saw themselves as empowered people. And that's pretty revolutionary.
Could it be said the definition of a rebellion?
I think of it as empowered, an empowered way of saying, I'm important. They weren't rebelling, they were being themselves. They were being more of themselves. They thought of themselves outside the little restricted ways that people thought of them. Women were only supposed to serve. Women weren't supposed to get too much education. Women weren't supposed to rule. But they knew they had abilities and powers beyond that. They organized themselves into clubs. They had dances. They hired some of the most noted bands of the times to perform at their dances. They paid dues. Some of the groups became so organized. And so they had leadership, and they were able to express their own leadership abilities within that social club framework.
Okay, all right, let's take that structure, all right, of the baby dolls. And because we're starting in, what, 1912 or something like that, okay?
Around that time.
All right, now, so let's flip that into 2016.
Yes.
And disenfranchisement, but also the so-called culture of today that dehumanizes women on top of the disenfranchisement from the larger community.
Yes. This group still largely is why I like the baby doll tradition so much. Is it's always been about a group of friends getting together, deciding on, and there are a lot of things. I mean, you know, people just don't get onto the parade because they just decided to go buy a dress at Walmart or order a costume. They sit down together, they plan. A large portion of their money goes into creating a beautiful persona for display on the public streets, and that takes planning. It takes getting along with one another. It takes time to create. It takes creative ideas. And so they spend a lot of time being together, talking together. And they also, each of the different groups that have developed in recent years have a social commitment. Many want to do things that are helpful to the community, and they do it in their own ways. Each group has causes that they champion and they get behind, and they do that. So not only are they participating in the wonderful civic life and creating life, you know, that's beautiful for us to look at, but also helping those people who are also in need. Amazing.
One of the most life-changing things for me was doing an interview, and this is connecting so much. It was a researcher out in Virginia, did research on the fancy girls during slavery. Mm-hmm. The girls, the fancy girls were the ones that they were the highest paid slaves, and purely their only role was to, you know, take care of the master or whatever, the fancy girls, because that was the role of black women for 400 years. And obviously, as these baby dolls, we're right in the middle of Jim Crow. Mm-hmm. So we hadn't moved past that slavery culture as almost the opposite of the fancy girls, to say that, no, we're not just objects to be used. To me, the cigar and so forth, it speaks, as you say, power, empowerment for people that after 400 years where black women were basically the highest role they can have is to be a fancy girl, which is zero, to now to say, I am somebody and don't mess with me.
Oh, yes, and they also were known as tough women, women that you would not mess with. A lot of my research came from, talking to people and collecting the memories of people throughout the city on how they thought about and remembered this tradition. And nowhere is there anywhere in any story that anybody came up to a baby doll and messed with them.
Right.
Or took their money.
That's right.
They were
That's
tough because life was tough to them, and
right.
so they had resilience that maybe other women who grew up more privileged didn't necessarily have, and so they knew how to survive, and not only did they know how to survive, but they also wanted to take care of their community, and they wanted to take care of the children in the community and their families in the community. So they were tough. And we have so few traditions as black women to celebrate that no matter the origins of the tradition, this is something that people had to do at that time. They had a hard scrapple life. But now, black women today want to take that tradition and say, our foremothers gave us something, and we're going to innovate on that, and we're going to carry the torch forward. Mm-hmm. And there are a variety of women who baby doll today,
really?
And they're even getting their children involved in the tradition, because it's about celebrating black women's beauty. It's not about a European standard of beauty. It's not about a 20-year-old version of beauty, because many of these women are in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and we just had a woman transition into being an ancestor, Mercedes Stevenson, wow. who had masked as a baby doll for a few years with some of her friends before she became part of the Wild Chapatulas Indian gang. And then just a few years ago, she started masking as a baby doll again in her late 80s. So this is an opportunity for black women in all of their body types, in all
yes.
of the hair configurations that we
right.
know that plague black women, to come out and be beautiful, and for other people to celebrate them as beautiful.
Okay, so let's look at our culture today, and it's not one monolithic culture,
right.
Black people, there's so many different parts. But the message of the baby dolls to the disenfranchised young African American, in the age of mass incarceration, I always say mass incarceration is dominated by men, but the greater victims of mass incarceration may end up being the women
yes.
and the families that
yes.
are families of incarcerated, men, and so would this be a day where we need black power?
Well, we need black power and we need black empowerment, and we have black power and black empowerment. There was a group of baby dolls last weekend that participated in the action for incarcerated youth, bringing attention to the plight of children who are caught up in the justice system in ways that are just not helpful for them, and they participated in that. So they are really making a difference in their community. And I want to talk about one important opportunity that the baby dolls are participating in right now. My book was selected this year to be the 2016 One Book, One New Orleans selection from the Young Leadership Council. The One Book, One New Orleans project is a campaign for literacy, and they get the book, the year selection, into the hands of those who are normally left out of the reading community. Those would be people who are incarcerated. They work with the Louisiana Books to Prisoners Project, getting books into the hands of people who are incarcerated. David Benedetto at WRBH Radio had the entire book read for airing for the visually impaired to be able to listen to the book. On WRBH, they also did interviews with women who mask as baby dolls, so that community can get to know who these people are. On Thursday, the Literary Alliance of Greater New Orleans, which is an adult education program, they're going to celebrate and give out Women Breaking Barriers through Literacy Awards. And baby dolls will come and talk about what it means to be a baby doll to these women who have overcome challenges and have gotten, their high school equivalency diploma. So the baby dolls are engaging now in many, many different things. A few weeks ago, Dillard University sponsored a Next Generation of Leaders panel, and the baby dolls went out to talk to the college students about what it means to be a leader, because baby dolls are cultural leaders. It's important to use the culture, because you and I were talking about the ways that we related to literature written by African Americans that helped us become better educated people, to help our educations mean more to us and to help us be able to do more with our education. And so it's been such a pleasure and a privilege to watch women who are baby dolls turn the page and say, that's my grandfather, or that's my relative, or I want to read this book because I want to understand more about the tradition that I want to become a part of.
Well, let's flip it a little bit. Okay, because you're an educator, a researcher, educator. Now, looking at developing young black children today, African American kids, whether the schools are doing great, failed, or whatever, we have a long way to go as far as removing ACT scores and things that are necessary, even in higher ed. Well, what part does culture play in developing powerful cultures? And no, better yet, even taking broken cultures, broken families that have been distraught and ripped apart by mass incarceration, poverty, and everything else like that. What part does that play of reestablishing those cultural traditions in creating a more educated, strong, prosperous society?
Yes. What I have been able to see is that there are elders who are in these different traditions. They sit down with the youth and they begin to teach them, how do you make a patch, that will become part of an Indian suit? How do you, what is the musical traditions that are associated with that? And here you have an adult talking to a child. And so that child is getting that one-on-one attention with adults. Then they also teach them, how do you perform in public? It's a really hard thing for all of us to speak in public and to begin to teach children how to represent themselves in public, how to be well-spoken in public, is something that these traditions give those children, because they practice. When you're out there and people are looking at you and they're admiring you, and you smile, you have a sense of self-confidence, because sometimes we want children to go up and recite a poem, but they're too shy. These elders work with them so they have the confidence inside themselves to stand in front of strangers and adults and say, this is who I am, this is what my tradition is, this is what I've created, these are my people, I am somebody. And then they know that they have this basis where they are special, and then they have a special responsibility to learn so that they can pass it on and they can make a difference. I think that's how we create empowered communities, one child at a time, with awesome. One elder at a time.
That is so awesome. I always say the key to the community is lack of cash. If our poverty is just ripping, if we didn't have poverty, we'd fight mass incarceration, everything. Okay, now, this concept of poverty, and this is my opinion, my thought, speaking with economists also, validating somewhat that our black self-hatred keeps us from building and supporting black businesses, probably more than any other issue. If we could love and appreciate one another, we could literally build. But could it be that not only do our self-hatred is more steeped in lack of black culture to build that love?
Well, I don't think it's steeped in black culture. I think it's steeped in mistrust. Okay. I think we don't trust each other. I think that's a part of the problem. And I want to speak to two initiatives that I was able to witness very recently that made me really excited. One goes back to the One Book, One New Orleans event. One of the kickoff events happened at the Oupoupadou Bar on Orleans Avenue. We called it Red Beans and Read. And so the community came out. It was a wonderful turnout. Judy Brodus, the bar's proprietor, and James Andrews were there to welcome guests. Project leaders and participants and volunteers from the Young Leadership Council, young professionals in our city who really want to make a difference, they came. Members of the different baby doll groups came. Members of the community came. And they were able to spend money at Upupadu. We ate the red beans, we bought the drinks, we celebrated the musicians that were there, and so we infused that business, you know, with hard cash. Yeah. The Treme and 7th Ward Cultural District now has an annual festival. Using the theme and the culture of the baby dolls, they organized something called the Baby Doll Bar Crawl. And they picked us up. There were different stops, and so they picked us up at stops. And there were people who had read about that particular bar crawl who were from Oklahoma and Chicago. Young people looking for something to do in New Orleans, all the way from Oklahoma, came on the Baby Doll Bar Crawl. And we went to establishment after establishment, and again, infusing cash. We went to the Black-owned bars in the 6th and 7th Ward. And all these buses driving up, and we bought drinks, we bought food. We knew to take back that message, go to that bar, go to that place. That's a great place to go to. And that was a cash infusion into the community. And I think that we can do more things like that. There are people, we have millions of tourists that come in. We need to organize more things like that to directly take them to our places of business so they can know that they're safe, they're professional, and they can have a good time or they can get their needs met.
Oh, it's getting more. I mean, we only have a couple of minutes, though, because the Times-Picayune even did this article, how the selling of the second line. You know, I'll never forget, the second line was literally sacred. I mean, you know, it was for the community, by the community, and it would beat up anybody who wanted to come. You know, it's like, no, but now it's for sale. But this idea of buy black, for black, it doesn't mean we hate white.
That's correct.
It's just a necessity.
It's a respect. It's a respect of where these traditions have come from. You can't commodify something and just suddenly buy the suit from someone, put it on, and think that you are witnessing an authentic tradition that is made because community people, friends and neighbors who pass this down, you know, it doesn't have the same kind of meaning. I understand, I'm an educator, so, you know, people want to see things. And so I think that there are opportunities for education, but it doesn't mean that because you know, want to have this second line, that it means the same thing. It's a second line for pay for your particular event, and you are, you know, using an aspect of the culture for your entertainment, but it is not the ritual aspect that is embodied and can only be embodied by the people for whom it is part of their culture.
And so, and particularly even, in other words, I could see you might buy the second line, but you can't buy the baby dolls. Look, the baby dolls, the book, hey, I can't push it, but I push it. Get excited about who you are and what you're all about. Thank you so much.